Today's reading is a simple one. Swamiji writes, "Don't try to impress others with your cleverness. Win them, rather, by your sincerity." We need to win people by the heart, not by the mind. And the principle here is something that I learned this lesson years ago when I wrote to Swami Kriyananda for a bit of advice. And he wrote me back and he says, "Jaya, if you wish to win people, show that they're true and loyal friends. It's through your heart that you will win them." And I found that throughout my life to be great advice, that if you want to win people, you have to do it. You don't do it through the head, but it's really through the heart. How do you make friends? You make friends because there's a feeling. It's a heart compatibility. And so this is how we attract people to us. It's through the heart qualities. And people are naturally drawn to us and through that. And it's through the heart that we project our magnetism to other people. And I'm sure you've noticed that in your day-to-day relationships with people, that people who have a big heart, they have an open heart, they have a warmness to the heart, you might say. You're immediately attracted to those people and you begin to win them. Whereas people that are very cerebral and mental up there, it's a little bit, they might be very nice friends too, but it's not nearly as attractive. So if we ask the question, what's the difference between being clever and being sincere? Well, one is of the heart and one's of the head. One's of the reason and the intellect, and one is of this quality here. And what Swami defined it, he said, a true and loyal friend. These are qualities which you would say that's what it means to be sincere. Think of what it means to be sincere. If we were to just put words to it, we'd say, well, a sincere person is somebody who has good intentions. Sometimes he doesn't always act wisely. He did the wrong thing, but his intentions were good. And so oftentimes we'll forgive a person because they make mistakes, because we know his heart was in the right place. He just didn't express that very well. We think a person, he's sincere, he's honest, and certainly honest in his feelings. Or you might say he's not devious. Yeah. Now, if you look at a person who's clever, well, a clever person, what is cleverness really? It's just a tool. Now, a tool of any kind can be used for good purposes or it could be used for bad purposes, and it just depends on how you use it. So it's not a bad thing to be clever. Actually, if you have a person on your team, you're trying to do a project, if one of your team members is very clever, that's a good thing, because a clever person is looking for novel solutions, better ways to do things, or they have a good capacity for doing things better. But on the other hand, also, isn't it true that when we think of cleverness, sometimes it has a negative connotation as well? There's this saying, "Oh, you're too clever by half." And other means you're too clever, and there's some sort of deviousness maybe behind it. And I think one of the problems with being clever is it's just a tool. It can be used for good and it can evil, or it can, or for negative purposes. But cleverness in itself doesn't have a moral compass. And isn't this, in a sense, when for somebody to be a friend or somebody that you want to associate with, somebody perhaps even who's a leader, if that person is clever, well, that's good, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they're morally pointed in the right direction. By moral compass, you might say, the ability to make those decisions and to do those things that leads them to what all of us really want, which is freedom from ego. We want emancipation. We want to raise our consciousness. And without a moral compass, we might do a very clever thing, a very creatively clever thing, but it takes us in the wrong direction. It takes us in that direction that's binding to us. And so cleverness by itself, without that moral compass, is a dangerous, it can be like a sharp tool, sometimes can be dangerous. And so we need to ideally We want to be both. It's not as that cleverness and sincerity are opposites of each other. Why not both and? That way you can have somebody who's very sincere and also he's quite clever about how he does things. But if you had to make a choice between sincerity and cleverness, which would it be? Now, I think we each have to make our own choices, but for me, I would rather have somebody, or I would rather have the quality in myself of being sincere. And I think it's for the spiritual devotee, I think it's the more important of the two. Now, that does not mean, I'm not saying that oftentimes what you find, sometimes people equate being sincere and not very practical with, you might say, I was sincere, but I did foolish things, and they use their sincerity as an excuse, you might say, to be foolish. We want to also be wise, and so it never should be used as I was sincere and that gives me a right to not do the right thing or a wise thing. But if I had, like I say, if I had to choose, I would choose sincerity first. And I think this is the wiser of the two choices, because what I've noticed is that you, in the spiritual life, in all life ultimately is spiritual. We're all on the spiritual path, whether we acknowledge it or not, that you have to begin your journey with a very strong foundation. And I think those qualities of the heart represent more of the foundation than those of the head. And if you have the foundation right, then you find that everything goes well. And so think of sincerity, a true and loyal friend, as Swami said, or as a quality that will win people. Loyalty, it's a true loyalty, or truth itself, firmness of purpose, being honest and stable. These qualities of sincerity need to form the basis of a person's personality, and upon that, then everything else can be built. But if the foundation is not strong, then what you find, it's like building your home on sand. You don't have a foundation that is stable. And so no matter what happens after that, if you don't have a stable foundation, somehow spiritually you don't succeed. And so everything begins with that stability of sincerity, and sincerity being one of those qualities. You could think of it in yogic terms also this way, is that if you think about the various chakras in the spine, the very base chakra at the Muladhara chakra, this represents qualities of steadiness, firmness of purpose, loyalty. You can count on that person. They're firm, and that's, of course, the negative side of that is people sometimes become stubborn or immovable and not able to adapt to change. But nevertheless, the positive side of those qualities are the basis of our spiritual path. And one of those qualities that is rooted at the very beginning of the spiritual path is loyalty to what we're doing. And you could say sincerity, being sincere and true, to not devious. And then from there we then begin to work our way up. And as we work our way up, you could say the various qualities, one building upon the foundation of the one below it, you find that the heart comes before the mind, and so that the heart is right. You could also take this to something that is very famously quoted, and we often talk about this on the spiritual path, of what Swami Sri Yukteswar said. He said, you need to be able, the devotee needs to purify the heart. And without the heart being purified, we're not able to take, as he said, one step on the spiritual path. Now that's interesting. Not one step on the spiritual path without first purifying the heart. And so it begins there. And why is this? Well, unless the heart is purified, and of course here thinking in terms of sincerity. Sincerity of purpose is, you might say, one of the exercises that we do in trying to purify the heart. It's a means by which we purify the heart, to be honest, to be truthful, to be clear in our intentions, to erase all falseness, false pretenses from ourselves. When we do, when the heart becomes purified, it develops a great magnetism. The heart itself is very magnetic, and the purity of the heart begins to attract to it all things that we need in life in order to be successful. And this applies not just to the spiritual path, but it also applies to success in life. Because again, going back to where we started, when a person is sincere, you're attracted to them. You may think they're foolish, but nevertheless, you trust them. And so it's the same with us, as if we develop the purity of the heart, the magnetism has an attractive power. And not only do we win other people, which is necessary, and I refer you again to that one phrase that Paramahansa Yogananda said. He said, if you cannot learn to win the love of other people, how can you expect to win the love of God? Isn't that interesting? Oftentimes people, they'll try to win God's love, they want God's love, but they can't win of other people because they can't put that love from a philosophical concept into practical, everyday, sincere application. And so that love then put into motion, actively expressed, has a magnetic power, and it begins to not only draw other people, but it also begins to draw to ourselves circumstances that are harmonious with our inner aspirations. And most especially, eventually, that love of the heart begins to attract the guidance that we need on the spiritual path. First, it begins to attract the spiritual inspiration of books and favorable circumstances for us to pursue our spiritual life. Then it begins to attract teachers and teachings to us. And eventually that magnetism of the heart actually will attract the guidance of a Satguru. And this pulls the Satguru to us. We often think, people say, I want to find my Guru. And it's a natural thing for a person to say, but actually we don't so much as go out and find the Guru. We attract the Guru to us by purifying and cleansing the heart. And when that takes place, then we find that the world itself begins to respond to us. And so I've taken this little reading today of cleverness versus sincerity to represent this deeper teaching, really the heart versus the mind. And I do not mean in any way to denigrate the necessity to also develop the heart and also then to make good choices, to use discrimination, to be able to do the right thing, to develop wisdom, because absolutely that too is necessary. But we have to go back to the beginning, purifying the heart. Swami Sri Yukteswar said the way to do this, of course, is by practical application of our yamas and niyamas in daily life, but also to overcome what he called the meannesses of the heart. Meannesses of the heart. Now, that word meanness, I always used to think he just meant it in the sense of when somebody's mean, they're cruel, or they're not very nice. And sometimes that's what we think, a person's too clever, they're not... But it also, meanness has another meaning to it. It has more than one meaning. I just used the second one right there, using mean. But the third meaning of the heart, of meanness, is small. And you might say it's smallness of the heart. We need to be able to expand that. And he gave various qualities that we need to overcome: shame and grief and hatred and pride and anger and these sorts of things that clutter up the heart and bind it. And it just it's like wrapping very strong ropes and strings around the heart that keep it from being able to expand beyond what its size is. And we have to slowly cut those strings to allow the heart's And this, again, using Swami Sri Yukteswar's words, the heart's natural love. It's not fake love. A person, if a person tries to be, let's say, again, sincere, and you know it's false, well, that's false, false sincerity, and immediately people see through that. It's not genuine. And of course, this comes with true sincerity, is something that's genuine in that other person. So it's the same with us. The heart naturally wants to expand. The heart naturally wants to reach out. The heart naturally wants to expand in its sympathies. And so if we allow that natural process to happen by removing those things that obstruct that natural expansion of our sympathies, then we find that it begins to have a great magnetic effect, and we begin to draw to ourselves those things that we need in this life. And materially, spiritually, in terms of friends, and particularly here, this reading today talks about winning friends when we're dealing with other people. Try to be sincere. Be sincere in a sense. Sincerity doesn't necessarily mean blunt honesty. And sometimes people think, well, I was being sincere. I said, you didn't, you were looking not very good today, and you have to use discretion. Sincerity is your intention, but then take it to the next level and let your intention be for the highest, but then learn to express that intention in a positive way. And maybe that's where the qualities of being clever can come into play, because it's good also to be clever, because clever in the right way means to be able to accomplish something in a world full of obstacles and obstructions. And many people, they have good hearts, but they can't seem to translate it into everyday realities. And that's where cleverness, you could say, comes in, is being able to find that way to be able to accomplish something that's for the highest purpose. And we want to have that as well. And we want to be able to, because we want to be able to be effective in this world. Who was it? Was it Swami Sri Yukteswar that saintliness is not dumbness, or was that Master? I forget. But one of them, saintliness is not dumbness, and this is something for all of us to remember. There's no excuse to be, to not be effective in what we're doing, and we have to be practical. We have to be able to put these teachings into motion. We have to be able to express them. Oftentimes, people tend to dismiss people of spiritual bent because they think they're impractical, but that wasn't the case in Master's teachings at all. Very practical man, and he exhorted his disciples to be such also. And in fact, many of his most advanced disciples were very practical businessmen. So let's keep that in mind as well. We want to have both. We want to be sincere in our intentions with a pure heart and express that. Don't be too minded and too clever by half. Try to express outwardly the highest aspect of what your heart's desires are and what your heart is trying to achieve, which is bliss and joy in this life, and express that cleanly and clearly through whatever you do outwardly. And in order to do that, you do need to be clever as well. So I think the two they go together quite nicely. Be sincere in your cleverness, let's say that, or be clever in your sincerity. You can put the two together in that way. So thank you all for coming this week, and we'll see you again next week on Living Wisely, Living Well.